Interestingly, obviously some people come to belief in God because of some miraculous intervention. And I do believe that miracles do occasionally occur. You know, something happens so remarkably that people are just sort of knocked sideways and say, "Oh, that must be God." And God does occasionally, I think, come into people's lives in that sort of a way. But even so, it's not really a proof that God exists. And I think the fact is people come to faith in a very different set of ways. Some people, in a logical argument, they finally come to the conclusion that there must be a God. C.S. Lewis would be an example of that. If you've read his spiritual autobiography, he talks about when he finally knelt by his bed and acknowledged that God was God, the most miserable convert in all England. But I think there are a few people in that category. I think most people, I think I've told this story to somebody else, but it's someone that this is way off the subject, but chap that I met once when he was much older. My father knew him when he was younger. And this chap was a bookies clerk in a greyhound racing stadium in Bristol. And for some reason, on a particular day, he got into a real financial mess. And if a particular dog won a particular race, he was in dead trouble financially. And as the race got going, this dog was winning. And in his panic, he shouted out, "God, stop that dog!" The dog fell down dead. He was so shattered that he wasn't a Christian, he had no Christian background, but somewhere he took out his Bible, stayed up all night reading the Bible, and became a Christian. I think that's pretty unusual. But occasionally, that sort of thing that does happen. So, I don't think there's any one thing that science could discover which would prove that God doesn't. For example, if it was proved that the multiverse is correct, that to me wouldn't prove that God doesn't exist. It could well be the way in which he did it. I'm doubtful, quite doubtful, as you will gather. But I don't think it would necessarily prove that God doesn't exist. So I can't think of particular things like that would prove that God doesn't exist. Is there more evidence for Jesus Christ being the Son of God than there is for M and string theory? Well, I think the answer is yes, but it's different. I don't think you can do... I think Christianity is a matter of evidence, but you can't do experiments on God in the same way that you can do experiments on M theory. The whole point about science is it's supposed to be objective, and that different people can do the same sets of experiments on the stuff, and if they do the experiments properly, they'll get the same answer. But if there's a God, it's about personal relationships. You can't do experiments on a personal relationship. I think probably a better analogy would be commitment to marriage. I think anyone who is thinking about getting married to somebody else would be stupid if they didn't think carefully about it and weigh up the evidence. Is this person suitable? Are we suited to each other and whatnot? But anyone who thought they could simply do it in terms of equations and QED would be absolute rubbish. I mean, in the end, you're taking a step of faith and of personal commitment. And I think God is like that. Now, going back more to the question, Jesus being the Son of God, I mean, to me, the crucial thing is in fact the resurrection. Jesus said he was the Son of God. And he also said that he would die and be raised again. If he did not come to life again, then he ain't the Son of God. If he did come to life again, then I think there's every reason for believing that what he said was true. So I think you can look at the evidence. Some of you may have read a book called Who Moved the Stone by Frank Morrison, who was somebody who was favourable to Christianity but couldn't say the creed because he didn't think the resurrection could possibly have happened. And then he actually had the chance, because of an illness, to study it seriously, and the more he studied it, there isn't any other sensible explanation. It must have happened that way, and came to a more orthodox Christian faith. But string theory and M theory, in the end, there will be a consensus among scientists. There isn't a consensus at the moment, but in the end, enough scientists will agree, okay, it's probably not true, or okay, it probably is true, for this and this and this reason. And there will be, in the end, there will be a scientific consensus. I don't expect there to be a scientific consensus about whether Jesus is the Son of God. It's not that kind of issue, unfortunately. In the end, it depends on a personal commitment. Not sure if that's very helpful. But, now, this is a question which is completely different, but is, I suppose, related. How did life commence? I have said that there is all this remarkable evidence that the universe is bio-friendly. In other words, that the laws of physics and the history of the universe are such that life is possible. Now, there's an awful lot more than that about, I mean, we don't know enough about it, but the fact that molecules like DNA and RNA and so on are possible is probably more remarkable than we realise. Water is the most extraordinary substance. I mean, water is completely necessary for life. And we tend to think of water as a rather ordinary substance. It is the most extraordinary substance that there is. It's absolutely remarkable, and its properties are absolutely essential for life. So there are all sorts of ways in which the universe seems specially designed for life. Having said that, to put forward a theory about life starting naturally rather than supernaturally is very difficult. Once life's got going, there's a cell with ribosomes and RNA and DNA and complicated mechanisms that can keep life going. But how on earth did it start in the first place is extremely complicated. And I don't think anyone has anything like a serious... People have ideas, but I don't think any idea has been put forward which is seriously suggested this is, almost certainly correct. There's so many objections. However, I don't think that Christians have a particular stake in saying, therefore, the origin of life was a miracle. Maybe it was. Maybe even God isn't clever enough to make life start naturally. I say that again? Maybe even God isn't clever enough to make life start naturally. But if it was always his intention that there should be life, I think it's not impossible to say that he designed a universe, not only a universe in which life is possible, but a universe in which life could start naturally. Let me give you an illustration which you may or may not find helpful. As I've said before, I want you to imagine a class of computer science students. And at the end of their course, they have an examination. In fact, there's only 2 questions, and you only have to do one of them. One question is for the ordinary, run-of-the-mill, competent students. The other question is for the really brilliant students. Okay? Question for the ordinary students is this. Here is a book of electronic components. Using this design book, design a complete working computer. Every part. Okay? So that's what the ordinary students are supposed to be able to do, to make a complete working computer given the components. But the bright students are asked, design a set of electronic components which, placed in a dustbin and shaken around for long enough, will assemble themselves into a complete working computer. A bit harder, agreed? Now, all I'm saying is, if life started naturally, I think it's an open question whether it is, but if life started naturally, then God solved the hard question. I believe that the whole of the world is part of God's work, and we shouldn't look. I do think that God does intervene supernaturally. He particularly intervenes with individuals and makes himself known to them in a way which is not sort of natural. But we shouldn't just look for the working of God in things which are miraculous and out of the ordinary and say, you can't explain that, there must be a God. Sometimes God wakes us up by doing something which you can't explain that. I'm going to stop with just one story. I hope that the person, I won't tell you his name, but this is a friend of mine, and maybe wouldn't mind me telling the story. This is somebody who, when we first got to know him, his wife was Christian, but he wasn't. And he wasn't anti-Christian, but he was an engineer and really completely convinced that the world could be explained in terms of material processes. There was no need to have any sort of supernatural explanation of anything. And what changed his mind, didn't make him a Christian, but put him on the track to becoming a Christian, was a dream that he had. And one night, he dreamt that he was back on the school bus, double-decker bus, and he was on the top deck of the double-decker bus. But what was odd, and dreams are often very odd, what was very odd was that the driving wheel had been extended to the top deck. So he was driving the bus from the top. But apparently the driver was still driving the bus down below. So he was having some difficulty in driving this bus. And in the end, in his dream, he came to a roundabout and he went off into a field and woke up. You may say, what on earth did that mean? Well, he spoke to his father, who had been asleep in a house 10 miles away. And his father apparently had a very odd dream. And in his dream, he was driving a bus, but somebody else was apparently driving the bus at the same time. And he had great difficulty in controlling the bus. And in the end, he came to a roundabout and went off into a field and woke up. And my friend said, that is so odd. That is something you can't explain naturally. There must be something else in the world. So that's where I'll start. I mean, I've been very much emphasizing in these talks that the natural, the world which you can study scientifically, is the work of God. But I think God often actually reveals himself in ways which are clearly personal and supernatural. I think we should stop there.